How would you feel if, at the moment you needed them most, you were left behind by those you love? This is the story of Carlos, abandoned by his wife and daughter as he faced terminal cancer. They left him alone, but years later they returned to confirm his death, only to be surprised by what awaited them. Let's dive into the story. Carlos's life took a significant turn when he was diagnosed with advanced cancer. This diagnosis was a severe blow for someone who had always committed to a healthy lifestyle, prioritizing a balanced diet and regular medical checkups. The doctor in charge couldn't provide a definitive answer about the exact origin of the cancer. It remained uncertain. However, a spark of hope appeared, with the mention of a small chance of overcoming the disease through intensive chemotherapy. Firm in his life's purpose, Carlos embraced this opportunity with determination, ready to face the challenge, no matter how difficult it was. When the time came to share the news that would change their lives, Carlos met with the two people who were his foundation: Vera, his partner of 18 years, and Camila, his teenage daughter. "I need to tell you something," he began. When Carlos shared his condition, saying, "The doctor confirmed it is indeed cancer," he saw the same mix of disbelief and sadness on their faces that he felt himself. Amid this whirlwind of emotions, he found the strength to be their pillar of support, assuring them he would do everything in his power to beat the illness. "Don't worry, I know it's hard, but we'll get through this together," he said. There was a great uncertainty about how the treatment would affect his life. As Carlos reflected on this, he embraced them both. He recalled the doctor's information about the challenges of chemotherapy, aware that many relationships face tension under the weight of treatment. Feeling insecure, he shared his fears with Vera, his wife. "I admit, I'm a bit scared," he said. With the calmness of someone who shares not only a bed, but also the deepest battles, she held his hand firmly, insisting that nothing, not even the illness, would separate them. "Remember our vows, in sickness and in health. It's something I will uphold until the end," Vera affirmed. "There's nothing more to say, thank you," Carlos replied, relieved. He could now focus on his recovery without the burden of financial worries, thanks to solid savings and insurance, as well as a substantial inheritance from his grandfather. His family had financial reserves for such situations, and their home was filled with cherished memories. The house where his daughter grew up was fully paid off, and Camila's future education was secured with reserved funds. With these practical matters arranged, he faced therapy. A week after the diagnosis, he began a treatment regimen that pushed him to his limits. Each session was a grueling endurance test, leaving him exhausted and barely able to recognize his once strong body. Returning home became a ritual of self-overcoming. Simple acts like eating, bathing, or walking turned into daily battles against an invisible enemy that drained all his energy. In this new reality, Vera and Camila didn't hesitate to offer all the necessary help. With love and care, they took over household responsibilities, prepared meals with extra dedication, and accompanied him to every chemotherapy session, ensuring no medical prescription was forgotten. In every gesture and supportive glance, they silently reaffirmed their unwavering commitment that, while the illness could affect his body, it couldn't touch the love that bound them together. Carlos was aware of how his health condition could impact the home environment. He tried to be as self-sufficient as possible, performing tasks during his moments of higher energy. Despite this effort, after 2 long months, he noticed a change in Vera and Camila's behavior. The atmosphere, once filled with solidarity, became tense. Reluctant sighs preceded their offers of help, and Camila sometimes avoided responding to simple requests, like fetching a glass of water or joining him for a walk. "Camila, how about we take a walk in the yard? I'd like to get some sun," he suggested. "Oh, Dad, I have some schoolwork to do now." "Maybe later," she replied, However, the changes became apparent to him one morning after a chemotherapy session when Vera suggested he take a taxi home. The suggestion was made so coldly that it surprised him, but he agreed. Upon returning home, he could no longer ignore the growing emotional distance. After resting for a few hours and gathering his strength, Carlos initiated a difficult conversation. "I'll get straight to the point. I've noticed some changes in your behavior. Can you be honest with me? We need to be transparent about our current situation," Carlos expressed. Vera responded, "Dear, it's not that we're dismissing your suffering, but we are a bit overwhelmed with all the usual tasks and the new ones." Carlos nodded. "I completely understand. I hate having to ask for help too. I thought of hiring a nurse. Many people do this, and my uncle chose this solution when he had hip surgery." Camilla and Vera agreed to the suggestion, and the following week, the new nurse Rosa started working at their home. However, what was expected to bring relief ended up creating a new problem. Vera felt somewhat replaced and experienced jealousy due to the nurse's constant presence. Noticing this, Carlos, always balanced, proposed that Vera resume some of the caregiving duties as much as possible. Unfortunately, this approach didn't have the desired effect, and the issue persisted. Amid this mix of emotions and misunderstandings, Carlos chose to remain calm, aware that increased negativity could further complicate his already challenging path to recovery. A late-night call added another layer to this emotionally complex situation. It was the worried voice of his mother-in-law expressing her disapproval of another woman being in her daughter's house. "Carlos, I understand your situation, but think about what the neighbors will say. I don't want my daughter to be the target of gossip," she said. Carlos replied, "She is just a professional, and everyone is aware of that." His mother-in-law persisted, "No, Carlos, things don't work that way." The discussion turned into a maze of unresolved issues, of emotions and responsibilities, where each decision seemed to trigger an unexpected consequence. Amid this storm of feelings, Carlos remained steadfast in the only safe harbor he had left, focusing on his health and hoping for better days when physical complications wouldn't mirror emotional ones. To maintain some peace in his home, which had always been a sanctuary, Carlos decided to face the situation with his usual dignified demeanor. Despite the illness and the exhaustion from treatments, he sought understanding and support from his loved ones, remembering his role as the family's provider even during his sickness. In a gentle but firm manner, Carlos explained to Vera, "I understand your concerns, but you need to trust me. This is just temporary, and for now I need Rosa's help." "I understand, it's okay," Vera agreed, seemingly determined to accept the situation. One day, after a chemotherapy session, Carlos encountered a scene that would be etched in his memory forever. A moving truck was quietly parked in front of his house. Carlos approached Vera and asked with a mix of surprise and apprehension, "What does this mean, Vera?" She replied, "This was the best solution I could find. Camilla and I are going to live with my mother while you recover. If you need anything, ask Rosa." "Are you really going to leave me like this?" Carlos asked. "As you said, it's only temporary," she replied, turning to continue packing the truck, showing an apparently unshakable resolve. At that moment, Carlos experienced a duality of deep sadness and the difficulty of expressing the confusion of feelings that deeply afflicted him. The exhaustion acted like a blanket, slightly dulling the intensity of his anguish, perhaps as a defense against a reality that would have been otherwise unbearable. In the solitude of his strangely silent home, devoid of the laughter and affection of his family, he faced the most painful situation of his journey, marked by the battle against the disease and challenges that transcended the physical, including the abandonment by his wife and daughter at his most vulnerable moment. This episode revealed a facet of his marriage that Carlos might have preferred not to recognize until then. Still, he maintained hope for better days. The support from his family, especially his brother Geraldo, and the caring presence of Rosa, the nurse, provided Carlos with a sense of community and solidarity. This contrasted sharply with the loneliness left by his wife's departure. Rosa's attentiveness and dedication did not only address practical needs, but also served as a balm for the emotional wounds caused by his illness and abandonment. When the nurse finally pressed the hospital call button to indicate his physical recovery, it symbolized more than just the end of a treatment. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, a liberation from a relationship that failed to provide the unconditional support expected between spouses. Carlos's decision to seek a unilateral divorce was not just a step toward emotional independence, it was also an affirmation of his dignity and self-worth. Besides being a legal decision, it was a way to assert himself and recognize his own value. He organized all the necessary documentation and sent it to his mother-in-law's address. Now Carlos could build a future focused not only on physical recovery, but also on emotional healing, surrounded by people who showed genuine empathy and support during tough times. Although the path ahead might still hold uncertainties and challenges, he was confident that he was regaining control of his life, deciding who would be part of his journey of recovery and personal growth. More than a year had passed since he had overcome the illness, and Carlos felt ready to move forward. He contacted his former employer and they agreed to have him back to work, even remotely. He accepted the offer. Although he appreciated his home, it held many bad memories, and he sought a fresh start in a better place. The generous Carlos planned to gift the house to Rosa, who had been a great support during difficult times, demonstrating remarkable kindness even to a stranger. She would have complete freedom to sell it if she wished. Carlos's move to a new neighborhood was more than just a change of address. It represented an opportunity to rewrite his story after a turbulent and painful period. His ability to adapt and find comfort in new routines and friendships revealed his resilience and the human desire for connection and purpose, even after traumatic experiences. He formed a friendship with his neighbor Marcia, who not only offered companionship, but also provided a perspective that life could retain its meaning after shocking losses, such as the death of a loved one or the end of a relationship believed to be eternal. Their conversations provided a common ground of understanding and mutual support, something that only those who share similar experiences of loss can offer each other. His hobby became more than just a pastime. It turned into a form of therapy, a way to create order and beauty from raw materials. This represented, alongside the process of rebuilding his own life, the act of gathering the fragments and constructing something new and solid. The search for new tools symbolized his quest for skills and experiences that would help him shape his new reality. Notably, even after overcoming the absence of his wife and daughter, the fact that he had not heard from them remained a prominent aspect of his story, suggesting that although he had recovered and made progress, some unresolved issues still lingered. One day, after visiting the hardware store, Marcia shared a concerning observation with Carlos. "I need to tell you something very important. Yesterday, as I was coming home, I saw two women, one older and one younger, loitering around your house. They knocked on the door several times, walked around, and since you weren't there, they got into their car and waited. After a while, they left. I thought about calling the police, but I figured they might be your relatives, and I didn't want to cause any trouble. Since they didn't return after you arrived, I thought I should let you know. I couldn't see clearly, but the older woman seemed to be about 60 tall, with light-colored hair. The younger woman was a bit shorter, with dark hair that reached her neck. As Carlos listened, a shiver ran down his spine. The descriptions matched those of his wife and daughter, and confusion engulfed him as to how they might have found his whereabouts. After all, only his brother knew his current address. Carlos began to consider the possible reasons his wife and daughter might have had for seeking him out, especially after they had left nearly a year ago without even a final goodbye. Marcia offered to handle the situation discreetly if the two women showed up again. However, Carlos was hesitant to expose himself to the pain of rejection once more, especially with the memories of abandonment still lingering. As night fell and a starry blanket covered the sky, Carlos sought answers by calling his loyal brother, Geraldo. "Carlos, we really need to talk. Vera and Camila are back," Geraldo said. "Are you sure about this?" Carlos asked, surprised. "Yes, I'm at your house now with Rosa. When they found out you had transferred the house into Rosa's name, they were furious. They broke some things in the garden and threatened Rosa. She's scared. Tomorrow morning, we're going to the police." "Oh my God, how is this happening?" Carlos responded. "You should also be on guard to avoid being pursued by them. They're not here, but they were close. They appeared yesterday while I was at a carpentry event. Marcia saw everything, and it was somewhat relieving to know that Rosa was protected by documents proving the transfer of ownership to her before closing that chapter of his life." He called Rosa directly. "Rosa, I'm really sorry. I didn't know this would happen." "Don't worry. I understand," Rosa replied. "But I need to tell you something. When they came, we had a big argument. I ended up telling them you had passed away and that I was handling things. They didn't believe me and somehow managed to get your new address. I didn't know what would happen. I just wanted them to leave you alone." "Don't worry, it was inevitable," Carlos said. For his ex-wife, it remained a mystery whether the divorce notice sent to his mother's house had been acknowledged or simply discarded as insignificant. Carlos, however, had already faced indifference and had reached a state of serene acceptance. The next morning, while attending to his daily tasks, Carlos was alerted by a persistent knocking sound. He quickly checked the security cameras and saw that his ex-wife still looked as she did in his memory, while his daughter Camila had grown almost into a woman, with noticeable changes in height and features marking the passage of time. Following the plan with Marcia, Carlos stayed inside the house, but moved close enough to the door to catch fragments of their conversation. Marcia stepped outside and approached them, greeting them politely and showing openness and friendliness, leaving behind the burdens of the past. "Hello, how are you? Are you new around here?" she asked. "Yes, we're just passing through. You've lived here for quite a while, right? Can you tell us if a man named Carlos used to live in this house?" Carlos's ex-wife asked, sharing a story about her husband or ex-husband living in that house until his supposed recent death after a long hospital stay. Marcia, recognizing that there was no evidence of Carlos's death or any related hospital records, something she knew well, responded calmly and directly. "Oh yes, Carlos lived here a few months ago, but unfortunately he passed away from cancer. He once mentioned that he moved here after being abandoned by his wife and daughter." Vera said that this misunderstanding was about a girlfriend of Carlos who recently moved into the house. Marcia, remaining composed, also mentioned that according to her recollections, Carlos had planned to donate his estate to charitable causes as he was divorced and had no close relatives except for a brother. The brother, upon seeing two women inspecting the house, expressed surprise and confusion, not understanding the context. A tense silence fell over the scene until Marcia sought clarification. "Do you have a death certificate or a will?" she asked. The refusal to provide these documents only heightened the uncertainty in the atmosphere. Melanie, always practical, advised on the necessary legal procedures, explaining that it was crucial to have these documents. She suggested going to a notary, as the true owners could obtain the deed to the house in their names if needed. Carlos's ex-wife reacted negatively to this advice, raising her voice and accusing Marcia, "Who do you think you are? Stay out of what doesn't concern you." Her hostile words disrupted the peaceful street that had welcomed Carlos so warmly, even though he was hiding behind the walls of his home. Although Carlos was tempted to confront his ex-wife over her uncontrolled behavior, he stuck to the plan agreed upon with Marcia. "Please don't take it the wrong way, I'm just trying to help. I never meant to offend you," Marcia explained. After a few minutes they left, and the silence returned as a relief. Seeking refuge in Marcia's home, Carlos expressed his sincere regret, saying, "Thank you, Marcia. Please accept my apologies for my ex-wife's behavior. I genuinely wasn't aware of this." "No problem," Marcia replied. "I have to admit, I even found it a bit amusing to see her lose her temper. I wish I could stay as calm as you do, but I know what she's capable of when she's angry. I imagine she'll be back tomorrow." While Carlos was focused on his carpentry studies, a sudden noise startled him. Upon exiting, he discovered a broken window and his ex-wife furiously destroying the remaining glass in the garden while neighbors tried to restrain her. She seemed to be causing a commotion, but Carlos had been so engrossed in his work and wearing headphones that he hadn't noticed the chaos. When he stepped outside, he saw two elderly neighbors trying to hold her back to prevent further damage. "Please, ma'am, stop doing this," they begged. Camilla and Vera, wielding metal bars, had already damaged the plants Carlos had carefully tended in pots. Carlos quickly and firmly grabbed her arm, demanding to know if she had lost her mind. His surprise was evident. She had thought he was dead and was only trying to intimidate the supposed new owner. "You two, get away from here now," Carlos ordered. "How could you think I was dead? Why didn't you come looking for me when you knew I was recovering? Why should I explain myself to someone who broke their promise to stand by me in both wealth and poverty, in health and sickness? And as for Camilla, how could she do this to her own child?" Carlos responded, each word carrying weight. "She looks just like you. She also abandoned me. I'm willing to relinquish my rights as a father and guardian. You should have considered this before abandoning me," he said firmly. "I no longer want any connection with either of you." In response to these words, her emotions shifted from sadness to anger. "You are insensitive and selfish," she exclaimed, which struck Carlos as deeply ironic given her age. Raising his voice, Carlos retorted, "You are nothing but an opportunist. I don't want to hear anything more from you, and I will use every means necessary to ensure I don't have to give you a cent." In that tense moment, she threateningly raised the metal bar towards him. It was at this critical point that the police arrived and acted without hesitation. Carlos's ex-wife and daughter Camilla were arrested. When asked if he wanted to file a formal complaint, Carlos readily agreed. "Yes, officer, I would like to accompany you to the station," he confirmed, agreeing to ride in the same car. As the mother and daughter were led to the police vehicle, their tears increased, but Carlos remained unmoved. The entire incident was captured by his security cameras, including the moment when his ex-wife broke the window. By the end of the day, the situation was in the hands of the police. With tensions having eased, Carlos arranged for the window to be replaced and the debris to be cleaned up. A temporary covering was installed to protect the house from the weather, while Marcia lent buckets to save the surviving plants. "It seems your ex isn't a fan of plants," Marcia joked, but honestly, her face wouldn't even make good compost. Carlos sighed slightly, and Marcia laughed, adding, "However, I'm relieved that everything turned out okay. I shudder to think what might have happened if she had hit me with that metal bar." Curious about why his ex-wife had returned, Carlos began to investigate. It didn't take long for him to uncover the truth. The recent death of his ex-mother-in-law had triggered a series of disastrous events. It turned out that the house where they had been living actually belonged to the ex-husband of his late mother-in-law. With her passing, the property was to be transferred to a nephew who decided to sell it. Left with no options, the mother and daughter sold their belongings and temporarily stayed in a hotel. When they returned to Carlos's former house, they encountered Rosa, who explained the situation. Carlos was already aware of the circumstances. They had managed to find a new address with the help of the neighbors, hoping to get some compensation since the divorce was unilateral. But they needed to confirm it. Whether he was alive or dead, the confusion led to accusations of vandalism, attempted break-ins, and assault. Camilla, being a minor, was sentenced to community service, while his ex-wife faced a harsher penalty due to the premeditated nature of her crime. In light of this, Carlos considered seeking a protective measure, at least temporarily, to prevent any more surprises. Carlos moved on with his life, healing from the pain of abandonment, and his ex-wife and daughter also came to terms with their own abandonment. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback is very important to us. Thank you.